This sentence dropped into my head and everything just went quiet. No one is coming to do it for you. And I realised I'm the one who has to live with the outcomes of my choices. So why wouldn't I make decisions that lead me to where I actually want to be? Hi everyone, I'm Lisa, and welcome back to Self-Awareness Sucks. Before we get into it, I just want to say, I'm not a psychologist, a therapist, or a medical professional, and I'm not here to give advice or a diagnosis. Everything I share in this podcast is based on my own experiences, thoughts, and observations, so please take what resonates, leave what doesn't, and if you are struggling with anything I mention, please do reach out to a qualified professional or at least someone you trust. So today's episode is a bit of a foundational one. And I say that because as I was putting it together, I kept noticing how much of what I want to talk about in later episodes actually traces back to this specific moment I'm going to discuss today. And there are a few things I'm actually going to mention that I'll be coming back to and expanding on properly later in the series. So I just wanted to flag that once up front so it makes sense when I do. And just to set the scene and give a bit of context in case you haven't been following along or haven't listened to the previous episode, that one was all about the first time I had a real moment of self-awareness, which was when I'd noticed that I'd built this habit of telling small white lies. And that had happened at the beginning of university when I started my undergraduate degree and I was 18. And what I'm talking about today happened at the end of university, so it just feels like quite a nice bookend to these first 3 episodes of the podcast, setting a bit of a background, giving a bit of context as to who I am and where this has all started. And I remember the exact moment it happened. I was lying on my bed in my uni room. It was 2021 and I was 22. I'd just finished my undergraduate degree, come through the pandemic, and gone back to campus for the last 6 weeks to see my friends and make the most of what was left. And at this point, I'd actually not seen my friends for 2 years because we went to Australia in July 2019, but we'd left campus in May 2019. And then I had to come back early in March 2020 because of the pandemic cutting it short. And then only had very limited time with my friends from September to November 2020 before we went into that second, much longer lockdown, which I think lasted until April or March 2021. And I remember also being aware of the fact that these 6 weeks, I had to make the most of them. Because the next time I'd see my friends would be graduation, and that simultaneously could be the last time I see them. So I was really in my feelings, and I think it was because there were so many things coming to an end at once. This huge period of uncertainty and change had finally come to a close with the pandemic, and there were just a lot of emotions sitting in that room with me. So I remember lying there thinking about all the goals I'd set at the start of uni, specifically getting my skin under control after struggling with acne for years, but also going to the gym to get fitter. And I hadn't done them, which for me was quite strange because I'm generally someone who, when I set my mind to something, I tend to stick to it and get to the finish line. For example, when I think of something I want to write, I will push through until I finish it. But with skin and fitness in particular, these 2 things I'd wanted to commit to, I just couldn't get a grasp on them. And that pattern had been going on for years. There are other things as well, but these 2 kept circling back. And I couldn't figure out why I was so inconsistent with these 2 specific things when consistency wasn't and isn't usually a problem for me. Now, years later, in 2026, I've managed to get my skin under control. And I can't lie, it took a lot of money, It played a big part in it, but it also took a lot of patience. But fitness, now that's still something I'm working on, and there are reasons for that which I'll get into properly much later. But for now, that moment, lying on my bed, I just couldn't understand why I kept failing at these two things, or what felt like failure. But looking back now, I was being quite hard on myself, and unreasonably so. I was not giving myself enough credit for what I'd achieved at that point. You know, I'd moved to Australia for a year, I'd completed an undergraduate degree and gotten through a pandemic. You know, pretty monumental things and hard experiences as well. But in that moment, I felt the weight of this big transformational period ending and this quiet sense that I just hadn't made the most of it. So I was lying there, staring at the ceiling and asking myself why. Why hadn't I followed through on these things? And then this one sentence popped into my head, which, when you say out loud, sounds obvious. But I think there's a huge difference between knowing something and actually letting it land. And the sentence was this: no one is coming to do it for you. And when that hit me, everything just went quiet. You know, when you have a very specific realization about something and it feels like everything else just comes to a stop. Well, that's what happened for me. It was just me and that room and that sentence repeating over and over and over again. And yet, like I say, it does sound obvious because, of course, no one is going to come and make the changes for you. Of course, you have to do it yourself. But I'd never actually taken it in properly before. It was just like this latent knowledge that I had, that I was aware of, but I'd never genuinely let it sink in. And I think to understand why, I need to go back a bit further. Now, I promise this relates, but it's a bit of a tangent, so just bear with. Growing up, I would consider myself more academic than I was sporty, or maybe even artistic, creative, anything like that. And English in particular just came naturally to me. You know, the writing, the analysis, the linguistic side of things. And I was very lucky that this was reinforced quite consistently. My teachers were very supportive and would tell me that my writing was strong, and my family would cheer me on, and even my friends as well, which made it feel effortless. And then, because it felt that way, I started to believe that it just was. And maybe there is some truth to that, but I then just believed that this was my thing, and my thing would always show up when I needed it too. And so this confidence that I had in my ability carried me through school without me ever having to think too hard about it. For my GCSEs, which are the final exams of high school when you finish, I was getting A stars consistently in all of my mocks and the practice papers and things that we would do in preparation. And then when I got my final grade after the exams, I got an A. Which I know it's still a good grade, but I really wanted that A star because that's what I'd been getting. And then something small lodged itself in the back of my mind, but I just kind of disregarded it or didn't really notice it in the first place. Then we went to college. Now in the UK, after high school, you have to spend 2 years in some kind of study. And you can go and do a vocational course, so something practical, or you can continue in the more academic route. So I did that. And you stay in college until you're 18 before you go to university if you choose to go. And again, I was getting A's through all of my mocks, through my coursework, all of it, because I'd done academic subjects again, English and history. And then my exam result came back, my A level, and I got a B in English. And for me, this was heartbreaking. And even though I still got into the university I wanted, it crushed me. And I remember crying the day I got those results. But I didn't really stop to examine why I'd done that and why it happened. And I just carried on. But again, something small lodged itself in my brain. And then I got to uni, where suddenly I wasn't the strongest person in the room anymore. I was surrounded by people who had all been the strongest in their class at English. I did English literature with creative writing for my degree. And instead of adjusting, I just kept coasting on the assumption that my ability would carry me, that it would just come naturally, and I wouldn't have to apply myself as much because this is just how it always been. And I was honestly a little arrogant about it. And then I started battling this really confusing in-between. I'd put in a lot of effort and then not get the grade I wanted. But then I'd put in less effort and somehow do better. And that made no sense to me at the time. But looking back, I think what was actually happening was that when I tried to force it, I was working against myself. And when I didn't overthink it, something closer to my natural ability came through. But either way, I wasn't actually learning how to build something properly. I wasn't actually developing the skills that I needed. I was just reacting in a way. And so I finished my undergraduate degree with a 2-1 with honours, which of course it's a good result, and I am happy with it. But I can't lie, at the time when I got that result, I was disappointed in myself. But then I knew, sitting in that uni room at 22, that I'd spent the better part of a decade coasting on latent ability rather than actually showing up for myself. And that the one time I'd really needed to consciously choose effort, I just hadn't known how. So when that sentence dropped into my head, no one is coming to do it for you, it wasn't just about the goals I hadn't met. It was the realisation that I'd been relying on a model of the world that had just very subtly stopped working, and that my natural ability was never going to be enough on its own, or wouldn't be. Maybe not never, but it wouldn't be. And that nobody was going to teach me how to show up for myself, and that I was the one who had to figure that out. And it wasn't a crisis moment, it was just something very obvious that I needed to fully understand. And I finally did. But I want to be clear about what I mean by that. I'm not saying no one cares. I'm not saying support doesn't matter or that you can't ask for help. It was just this moment of realising that if I wanted to achieve something, I was going to have to actually put in the work. No one else could do that part for me because I can't outsource effort. I can't outsource consistency or follow through. But I think what was also tied to that transition was going from adolescence and into adulthood. You know, no more timetables, no teachers chasing me, no structure being handed to me. And it went from having things largely planned out to suddenly being fully responsible for my own life. And I just realised that I'm the one who has to live with the outcomes of my choices. So why wouldn't I make decisions that lead me to where I actually want to be? Now, I know that sounds like something a motivational speaker would say, and I'm not here to be a motivational speaker. But that genuinely just changed things for me. And so I remember getting up off my bed that day, you know, classic student behaviour, starting my day at midday. But I did my skincare, I ate something, I tidied up, I made a to-do list, and I did a workout because I thought there is no time like the present. And from that point on, I started working on things more intentionally. And so I want to go back to those specific examples about my skin and fitness because I think it's easy to say, oh, I started showing up for myself and leave it vague, when the reality of it is much more glamorous than that. And it was those two specific things that this phrase just really related to for me. Now, first, my skin. I'd struggled with acne for years, as I said, and it had really affected my confidence. And once that realisation hit, I stopped waiting for it to just sort itself out or for someone to come to me with all the solutions and fix it for me. So I started paying attention by watching YouTube videos and reading up about ingredients and educating myself slowly over time until I genuinely felt like I understood what was going on with my own skin. And then when I worked in retail, I was fortunate enough that I was able to build on that knowledge even further. But it was slow and it wasn't linear, but it did just move the needle a little bit. And secondly, fitness. Now, I used to be the person who said, I hate exercise. Oh, I don't do exercise. And even to this day, you won't catch me running anywhere because I don't enjoy running. But I do work out consistently now. But once that thought had hit me, I kept asking myself, if I want to feel stronger and better and pain-free, what's actually stopping me? Me. I'm the only one who will ever stand in my own way. So I broke it down for myself, just a rough plan, a few sessions a week, and just paying more attention to how I was eating and what I was eating. And it just became a bit of a checklist in my head, which for me made it feel a lot less overwhelming. Now, it's still not perfect, but it was just this starting point that I really needed. And then I applied the same to when I did my master's, because I'd been so hard on myself after my undergraduate degree, because I hadn't gotten the grade I wanted. So I just kept telling myself, if I want to do better, I actually have to commit. So I showed up more. I did the reading. I planned ahead. Because I knew that if I didn't, that was entirely on me. And even this podcast, I wanted to do it, so I just started. No one was stopping me. Again, it would only ever be me getting in the way. And we have so much more freedom than we sometimes realise. But as I talked about in the intro episode, unfortunately, there is no overnight 180 with a glamorous transformation moment. Because it took me about 4 or 5 years to actually properly act on this realisation that I've been talking about. And it wasn't an instant transformation. It was just a shift in direction. But I just want to sit on that for a second, because awareness does not equal instant action. I had to sit with that ceiling moment for a long time before it actually changed how I moved through the world. I had to figure out what it meant for me specifically, not in theory, but in practice. And as I said in the last episode, the noticing was one thing. Everything after it is the work, because change builds slowly through small choices made consistently over time. So I'd had this idea for this podcast months before recording anything, but I needed time to get past my own doubts first. And actually that shift from thinking about something to actually doing it, however imperfectly, is something I want to talk about properly in the next episode. But here's the part I want to focus on and where it gets a little heavy. Once you realise no one is coming to do it for you, you also have to reckon with what that actually means. Because it's not just motivating. It can be a lot of pressure to take on. It's like having someone stand next to you while you learn something completely new. They can encourage you, they can guide you, they can show you how it's done, but they can't learn it for you. At some point, you have to be the one to actually do it. And when it comes to internal work, it's the same thing. No one else can get in there and rewire the system. They can hand you the tools, but you're the one who has to use them. And I remember thinking about the white lies habit from the last episode, how once I'd noticed it, I couldn't hand it to anyone else to fix. I had to be the one to catch myself over and over again and choose differently. And I remember how exhausting that was. Not dramatically, not in like a collapsing on my bed at the end of the day kind of dramatic and exhausting, but just subtly, persistently exhausting and tiring. So when this new realisation hit, no one is coming to do it for you, it was like the same thing but bigger, because suddenly it wasn't just one habit, it was everything. Every goal, every change, every version of myself I wanted to move toward, all of it was on me. But I also noticed something else sitting in that feeling. Because when you're the one responsible, you're also the one who constructs the story around it. The narratives we build about ourselves, about why we haven't done something, about who we are and aren't, can become self-fulfilling in ways we don't always notice. And those stories that we build about ourselves I'll actually be coming back to properly later in the series. But that's what I mean when I say self-awareness sucks. It's not just the noticing, it's the moment you realise the responsibility is entirely yours, that there is no one coming to take it off your hands. And that can feel really overwhelming at times, if not all the time. But at the same time, in a strange way, it's also kind of freeing. I actually had a moment this week where I noticed something about myself and I just said out loud, "Oh God, here we go again." Because there's always something new. Because we're growing and we're changing and we're going to pick up habits and we're going to drop others. And it never really stops. And so I'm still having realizations constantly. And funnily enough, I had an astrological reading recently that told me that 2026 is going to be my year of self-awareness. And when I first read it, I thought, oh Jesus, how much more self-aware can I get? But I guess that's the whole point, right? And at least I'll have plenty to talk about on here. But I actually want to say that I'm really proud of where that moment has led me. Even if saying that out loud still feels a bit cringe, which cringing at things is also something I want to get into in a few episodes' time. But yeah, I'm proud of where it's leading me and where it has led me. So I want to leave you with one question, and as always, there's no pressure to answer, it's just something to sit with if it resonates. Is there something you've been waiting on? Is it like the right moment, the right person, the right circumstances? That actually, when you're honest with yourself, only you can move forward on. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.